Whoa, whoa, whoa. Wait a minute. This is part 2 of the pinball history. Don't watch this one until you've seen part 1 for that juicy context. Anyway, let's just get right into it. We're just gonna get right back where we left off last time, with those big changes I was talking about. Pinball was about to go through what is probably the most important metamorphosis ever. Move over, butterfly. That shift was the change from electromechanical pinball machines to the sleek new solid-state technology. This new solid-state technology, or SS as we'll be referring to them from now on, were different in that everything was controlled by a series of microchips instead of EMs, which were controlled by reacting to individual bells and whistles. This allowed SSs to be way more sophisticated and complicated, as they could do more and keep track of what's going on. Nobody knows for certain what the first SS pinball machine was. It could have been Microgames' Spirit of 76, or it could have been Allied Leisure's Dynamite, but it doesn't matter because neither of them sold very well. More importantly, our main characters Williams and Bally had been quietly working on their own SS technology behind the scenes. Meanwhile, Gottlieb would dig their heels in the ground and refuse to move on to the new tech, thinking, "We don't gotta change. We've been doing the same thing for forever and everyone loves it. This new shit's just a fad. People will get over it." This was a mistake the company would never recover from. There was probably a big push in the industry to move to SS because the new video arcade games very suddenly and very rudely upended the pinball scene. Nobody wanted to play pinball, not when Donkey Kong was around. Atari's founder, Nolan Bushnell, said himself that he planned to replace the stinky old pinball machines with his arcade games. So naturally, Atari would make their own pinball division for no reason. Great plan. Not only that, but they would charge more for their pinball machines than the other guys. Sorry, did I say Nolan Bushnell? I meant Socrates. Atari's pinball machines were all pretty buggy and unpolished in an attempt to be cool and innovative, but it all kinda smelled like one big scam. Maybe probably the most influential designer ever, Steve Ritchie, as well as his brother, maybe probably equally as good designer Mark Ritchie, both got their starts at Atari, so it wasn't all bad, even though they both hated it. Bally would ultimately beat Williams to the SS punch in December 1976 with their first mass-produced solid-state game, Freedom. Williams would follow close behind with Hot Tip in September the next year. Surprisingly, Sega would also beat Williams with their Rodeo a year before them. Meanwhile, Allied Leisure's just been re-releasing the same game over and over with a new name. Way to go, guys. Ding ding ding, someone just broke the production record! Which one of those squirrely companies did it this time, huh? Turns out it was Williams with their space mission. Good going, fellas. But never mind Williams, something big's about to happen. In early 1976, a motion to overturn the 34-year ban on pinball in New York came before the New York City Council. Somebody needed to come help the case and give a demonstration to prove to the court that pinball had long since evolved into a game of skill. But who would be up to such a monumental task? That would be none other than famed pinball historian, chief licensor, god-tier competitor, and sometimes designer Roger Sharpe. All that pressure on those two sexy shoulders. Originally, Sharpe was supposed to play Gottlieb's El Dorado, but the court suspected that the game was rigged somehow, so they said, no, play that one over there. So yes, someone did play pinball in an official courtroom, and it was glorious. Sharpe showed off his immaculate ball control and strategy, but the court was still unimpressed, so Sharpe suddenly announced that he was gonna let the ball drain on purpose and shoot it right up through the center lane. As soon as he pulled this little stunt off, the judge didn't need to see any more, and the ban was lifted. Sharpe would later say that the shot was pure chance, haha. The TLDR of this whole thing is that Roger Sharpe is the gilded gamer, so pinball became legal in New York and soon the rest of the country. Fuck you, LaGuardia. With Wizard, Bally was really challenging Gottlieb's dominance, but once Bally released Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy, it wasn't much of a question who was king from then on. Not only was Captain Fantastic another great game, but it was another licensed game too. Licensed games were better than anything else at catching people's attention, and Captain Fantastic would break Williams' recent record by another 6,000 units. Zaccaria would release Supersonic sometime in 1977. This is probably my favorite example of artwork done by the criminally underrated Lorenzo Rimondini, who did all the amazing art for Zaccaria. Look at it. Bally's Evel Knievel would be their first game to be made fully SS, firmly supplanting them as number 1. Sorry, Gottlieb who? Roger Sharpe would release his book, Pinball, to tell the story of pinball up to this point, and it would definitely never be outdone by any other book or series of books, cough cough. At some point, Sam Stern looked at the shriveled up corpse of Chicago Coin and decided to take it over with his son, Gary Stern. The quote-unquote new company would thereon be called Stern Electronics, and they vowed to one day be the biggest pinball company ever. Yeah, right. Later, Bally would make 2 prototypes for a game called Bigfoot. This game was big. Really big. So big that the whole thing shook apart whenever you tried to use the flippers. I don't know why anyone thought this was a good idea. The next month, Bally would release yet another hit, Matahari, which was also their last EM. It was also available in an SS version, so I don't know either. Later, Sega would come out with Millionaire, which was cute in the fact that the bumpers sat on a spinning turntable. That's really something. What's more something is Sega's Women Lib, which appears to be based on women's right. So go Sega. Whoever said pinball was sexist? As if things couldn't get worse for Gottlieb, they would be bought out by Columbia Pictures. Pretty quickly, that fun family-owned company with a super close team turned into a cold clinical factory where the higher-ups limited everything the designers could do. What's even worse is that their new bosses still didn't want to spend the money on SS technology, putting Gottlieb even farther behind everyone else. This is so sad. You know it's bad when Zaccaria makes an SS before you. Maybe it's not so sad for them because it looks like they're the ones in third now. Even Playmatic beat Gottlieb out, and I don't even remember who those guys are. With all this new solid-state technology, Taito do Brasil, a Brazilian subsidiary of Taito, decided they too would make their own pinball division. And by make their own, I mean they would copy popular games and give them a new coat of paint. Thanks, guys. Williams would release Disco Fever, based on Saturday Night Fever, in August. This game would feature a special banana-shaped flipper which nobody liked. The company called them futuristic curved flippers, but everyone else called them garbage. Wee woo, Bally's on fire. They just released yet another hit, 8-Ball. This one's for all you pool fans. The game would kinda be their El Dorado, as it would be so successful that the company would remake it over and over. Not really surprising when you consider 8-Ball broke the production record again. Man, Bally's really on a roll lately. Williams' Phoenix would have a lot of firsts for them. It would be the first time Barry Ausler would design a game for the company, and it would also be the first time the artwork was done in-house by Constantino and Janine Michel. It didn't take too long for the Hankin brothers to get started on their road to pinball stardom, releasing Orbit 1 and FJ in the same year. What do you think FJ stands for? Paul Ferris would leave his job as a teacher to enter the fast life of pinball art. It was at Bally that he tirelessly worked with new screen printing technology to produce stunning pieces like Lost World and Paragon, the latter only being called Paragon because of how good it was. Wendell McAdams, a former employee of Chicago Coin, would make his very own game plan, which was to make a company called Game Plan. They would just kinda make cocktail tables for a while. Cocktail pinball tables were a short-lived fad led by Allied Leisure, and they were pretty popular for like 2 years. It was at Game Plan that prolific designers like Ed Chebula and got their starts. So that's cool. Well, half cool, I guess. Meanwhile, Sega's looking at those sexy arcade games and, guessing from what Sega is known for today, promptly switch sides. Okay, I see how it is. Go ahead, go make your video games then. Treacherous swine. What the hell? I've been in second place my whole life. And look who's in first. Bally? Yeah, right. I'm gonna have to do something about that. Williams would release Flash in January 1979. Being the first reel designed by the beautiful, legendary Steve Ritchie, this game would go on to be the third best-selling pinball machine of all time. But how did it turn out that way? Well, in reality, Williams' last real success was Space Mission, and they really needed a big game to keep the company from, you know, dying. Flash would have the first sound effects, using a dynamic background noise system. It's also the first game to use the flash lamps, which kinda got their name because of the game. Thanks to Flash, Williams was no longer the Zeros. They were, in fact, the heroes. Speaking of Zeros, Gottlieb's still over there making EMs. In the blink of an eye, the once great king of pinball suddenly had to play catch-up with guys like Williams who were ripping off Star Wars with their very own Stellar Wars. Superman in March would be the only Atari pinball machine that was ever popular, probably only because it was Superman. Not only that, but Atari would also make their own useless big game in the form of Hercules. Hey, at least this one won't fall apart like the other one. Or maybe it did, I don't know, kinda wouldn't be surprised given Atari's reputation. Around this time, Atari was bought out by Warner, and Warner, looking at Atari's Omega train wreck of a pinball division, decided to pull the plug on it. So, rip Atari Pinball, you will not be missed. Honestly, this whole thing was cursed. They should have been cancelled long before this. GamePlan would release Sharpshooter in May 1979, and this would be their first game that wasn't a cocktail table. And wouldn't you know it, it would also be their most successful game they'd ever make. I'm so proud. You know, Allied Leisure never stopped making those cocktail tables, and now they're dead. Later, Bally would release Kiss under license, and it was a pretty popular game, but that's not why we're talking about it. If you zoom in on the double S on the backlash, you might see something that looks suspiciously like a certain naughty symbol. It stands for solid state? Anyway, they had to change it. Another Pseudo fad that never really died off were wide bodies. As the name implies, they're pinball machines, but wide. A great example of this is the aforementioned Paragon, but also Gottlieb's new Genie, one that is definitely not an EM, is also a good example. By now, Gottlieb begrudgingly turned over a new leaf and are fully on board the SS train. No, get out of here. This was a train they needed to get on if they wanted to survive pinball's next big extinction event. But more on that later, cause Williams really doesn't want to be in second. So they made Gorgar. This was not only the first pinball machine that could speak, but the first video anything that had speech. In the game, Gorgar spoke to the player with a very limited vocabulary of Gorgar,
give orange, me give eat orange, me eat orange, give me eat orange, give me give eat.
Despite only having 7 words, it was still pretty amazing. This, along with Flash, were cutting-edge games in 1979 and helped Williams catapult into first place. Will anyone else be able to take the throne from Williams? Probably not. Especially not that Stern guy. Where was I? Oh right, another tragedy. Pong might have released in 1972, but it was around the start of the 80s that we saw games like Space Invaders, Pac-Man, and Galaga come out. These new arcade games were huge. Really huge. And they were starting to make pinball look like a silly bad game that only stinky old men played. In other words, Pac-Man was hot and pinball was not. Faster than anyone could have guessed, arcade cabinets started to take pinball's spot in arcades. The pinball guys knew this, which is why Bally would team up with Midway. Williams would also start making their own video games as well as pinball machines. One of those was Joust. Yeah, that's right, it's time to talk about Joust, not a pinball machine. Psych! You thought I was going to tell you about Joust, but I actually just want to talk about Python Angelo's story. Who is Python Angelo? Angelo was a Romanian man who spent his days learning from the best artists and craftsmen in his country. Because of what I can only assume are communism-related reasons, Angelo moved his family out of Romania to Israel, Germany, New York, and finally Chicago, where he gained notoriety after the Chicago Tribune devoted 4 pages to his work. From 1974 to 1980, he would have 2 art studios in downtown Chicago, Pen and Ink and The Art Force. Where this all comes full circle is when Williams was working on a little game called Joust. Yep, there it is. And they really needed someone to animate the birds, because I guess only one man in Chicago could do that. And that man's name was Python Angelo. The man even left animating for Disney and took a 50% pay cut all because he believed gaming was where animation was heading. So he took the job, but don't worry, because what he really wanted to do was draw little amusement parks on pinball machines. So naturally he jumped from video game animation to pinball art and design. Think about it, a few minutes ago you didn't even know who this was. Imagine being that naive. And if you thought Williams would slow down on the pinball side of things, you'd be dead wrong. Even after releasing banger after banger, Williams wasn't about to take their foot off the pedal just yet. Which leads us to Firepower, the first SS game to feature multi-ball, as well as the first game to ever have lane change, wherein the player can change the status of the rollover lanes with the flipper buttons. Meanwhile, with the release of The Amazing Spider-Man, Gottlieb seems like they're finally getting back into the swing of things. Huh? Don't believe me? Well, did you know that Stan Lee had one of these things in his office? See? That means it's gotta be pretty good. Later, in June, GamePlan would come out with Pinball Lizard. Get it? Then, Gottlieb said, you know what people really want? A timer. And when the timer's done, you don't get to play anymore. That didn't go poorly for anyone ever before. And so Gottlieb stuck a timer on their James Bond, and no one liked it because, believe it or not, people actually want to play the game. While everyone else was releasing a bunch of games that I don't feel like I even need to mention, Steve Ritchie was about to give Williams their best game yet, Black Knight. You notice anything about that? Oh, I don't know, maybe the multi-level playfield? I mean, it was also the first game to feature MagnaSave, a function where the player could save the ball from going out the out lane, but who cares, look at that deck. The success of Black Knight sort of started a trend of upper playfields for a little while, with it being the main feature in the likes of Electra, Lightning, Iron Maiden, no not that one, Jungle Lord, Pharaoh, Solar Fire, etc. But Black Knight, as well as Bali's Xenon, brought with them a delicious side dish that might just become the most fun part of pinball, ramps. That's right, every pinball enthusiast's favorite part of shooting a pinball doesn't make its debut until this late. There's a little asterisk on that first, but who cares. It would take a little bit for ramps to become super integral to pinball's DNA, but we'll get there. Also, Xenon was the first pinball machine to have a woman's voice, so that's neat. You know, Star Wars is pretty big. Like, stupid big. I wonder why. Anyway, someone was gonna make a Star Wars pinball eventually, and if you had to guess who'd be the first to do it, I bet you wouldn't think of good ol' Hankin from Australia. They'd released The Empire Strikes Back in 1980, and look at that, they're dead. But don't worry, the Hankin brothers would make a new company, AMD, for distribution. Apparently, those pesky arcade games were what did them in. Who would have guessed? Back at Bali. Man, these video games are really doing a number on us. Anyone got any ideas? We could just write off our previous successes. Genius. So, Bali would release 8-Ball Deluxe and Fireball 2. Truly marvels of originality, but who cares, they did well. Just because Williams is far and away the best in the business now, that doesn't mean Bali's been a slouch this whole time. I mean, look, they just came out with Fathom. That one's pretty cool. Don't ask me what's going on here. You know what? Do ask me what's going on here, because you may have noticed just how unusual pinball art has become. Everyone's ditched the weird angular style of the 70s in favor of the highly detailed fantasy sci-fi fever dreams, aka the best era of pinball art. Anyway, Zaccaria just came out with Locomotion. This game's great because one of the things listed under notable features is train sounds. Wait a minute, isn't Zaccaria supposed to be third place or something? Where have they been? Well, don't worry, they've been, but I'm at the point with them where the only thing I can mention is train sounds, so they haven't been a whole lot. But trains can't keep you in third forever, especially not when Gottlieb just released Black Hole. Ever since Gottlieb fell out of favor, they had to really claw their way back, and Black Hole was the result of them giving it their all. Black Hole, otherwise known as the most popular Gottlieb solid state ever, was a much needed home run for the company. The game really showed that Gottlieb wasn't going to be the guy stuck in the Stone Age anymore. It featured cool 3D backglass and, more importantly, another playfield under the playfield. All the new advancements of the era really made everyone think outside the box, and Black Hole is a perfect example of that. Move back into 4th, Zaccaria. Meanwhile, Bali was like, I'm not scared or anything. I'm just gonna release Centaur real quick. Ah yes, Centaur, one of Bali's best from the era. I don't think anyone's old enough to get what's going on here. Centaur would pay homage to Bali's classics, like Balls a Poppin' and Circus, somehow. It would be so popular that they'd make a Centaur 2 in 1983, which would essentially be the same thing. Just like Inder's Centaur from 1979, I don't think the pinball community knows what a Centaur is. Just for safe measure, Bali also released Electra, the first game to feature an upper and lower playfield. Sorry Gottlieb, too slow. Meanwhile, Williams said f*** it, Hyperball. This is not pinball, but it is the first time we see an alphanumerical display for the letters. But why does this even exist? In fact, why is pinball so f***ing weird right now? Trust me, it hasn't been easy. Even for the king, too many slip-ups in a row would spell doom. Arcade games have just been getting so sophisticated that pinball had to give its all just to stay in the race, which was a double-edged sword. Pinball needed to get better and better with every release, but making pinball more complicated just made them more expensive and harder to maintain. Even when they were great, operators were more likely to look at Pac-Man as a safer option. Another option, like Hyperball, was just to do weird shit. You know, do something unique to stand out. That's the case with Stern's latest game, Orbiter 1. This game had a 3D playfield modeled after the moon. I don't care how annoying it probably is to play, I think it's cool. And now they're dead. Probably the video games again. But don't worry, this won't be the end of the Stern story. Anyway, Gottlieb was probably real salty about Bali stealing their idea with Electra, so they made their own triple level game, except this one would be better. I mean, this one had 8 flippers. What the hell? What horrible timing! Another pinball manufacturer is born. This time it's Joodle, in France, a company that specializes in darts, pool, and various other arcade things. These guys stood out because they were French only, no foreigners allowed. They'd only make pinball for a few years before going back to what they did before, but they are still alive today. Can't say that about these guys, can I? Speaking of the others, Gottlieb just came out with Devil's Dare. Oh Jesus Christ, are you trying to give me a heart attack? Ah, it hurts my eyes. Trying to cash in on the video game craze, Gottlieb made Caveman, the very first pinball/video game hybrid. It was made to appeal to both pinball players and gamers, but it ended up being enjoyed by absolutely no one. Well, someone was bound to try it eventually. Meanwhile, Williams released their newest pinball machine, Varcon. Where's the pinball machine? Wait, that is the pinball machine? Why does it look like that? What, am I supposed to use those joysticks? What for? Huh? Are you trying to trick me? That same month, Zaccaria finally figured out how to do speech, and it's beautiful. Everyone else was doing it, so Bally made their own hybrid game, Baby Pac-Man. Pac-Man for babies. This one was a bit better than the others, but probably only because it was essentially Pac-Man. Trust me, there were real pinball machines made this year, but when the only ones worth mentioning are these knockoffs, you know they were down bad. Later, Williams would take all the drugs and make Time Fantasy. Look at it. And then they would take even more and make Rat Race, which isn't pinball, but only 10 were made, so who cares? Look at it. While everyone else was out there making fake pinball machines, Zaccaria decided it was their time to shine, so they made Time Machine, which has an extra section of the playfield that raises and lowers depending on what's going on. Today, Zaccaria is known for being the guys that put at least one really neat mechanic into each of their games, and this is kinda where that kinda started. Back in the States, the Big Three started making cost-effective games, because cheaper games were better than games that no one liked. Gottlieb, for example, started re-releasing some of their best EMs and SSs. At the same time, Williams made Firepower 2 to capitalize off their previous hit, even though it was nothing like the original Firepower. It was, however, the first design from Mark Ritchie, Steve Ritchie's brother, and yes, he is also a god. Along the same lines, Gottlieb came out with Amazon Hunt. I don't know if this game is good or what, but it got 2 whole sequels down the road. For the life of me, I don't know why. Zaccaria would come out with Farfalla in October. This would become probably their best/most well-known game today. The game had an opening upper playfield and very vibrant art. Looks like they were taking a page out of Time Fantasy's book, eh? Coca-Cola would purchase Columbia Pictures in 1983 and renamed the struggling Gottlieb to Milstar for no reason. When this was brought up to a bitter Ed Krinsky, he said, "Why hasn't all this research into this great new name come up with the fact that Milstar pronounced backwards is rat slime?" Where then the room burst out laughing. Columbia Pictures had already pissed off Gottlieb veterans like Krinsky, who had fond memories of the tight family-run Gottlieb. Changing the iconic Gottlieb name showed that Coca-Cola was gonna make it even worse. The higher-ups thought that the name Milstar would evoke a sensation of a company doing new, shiny things, even though they were doing the same thing as before. In reality, Gottlieb was such an iconic American brand name at the time that changing the name probably had the opposite effect than intended. Way to go, Rat Slime. In December, Wico's AF-Tor would be the first actual pinball machine to use an alphanumeric display. Wait, who the hell is Wico? Wico Corporation was an important company that specialized in spare parts and such for the coin-op industry. For some reason, they only ever made 2 pinball machines, this one and Big Top 10 years previous. Why would they do this? I don't know, but they made it so I had to mention them. As mentioned before, the pinball industry was, how should I put it, on the brink of being dead for good. So, Williams told Oursler and Ritchie that if they didn't reveal a big hit at AMO8, it was Funzo Dunzo, so, you know, no pressure. So, who was gonna save pinball this time? How about this guy? Joe Kaminkow. Behind the scenes, Kaminkow had been in the talks with a little-known organization, NASA, to get the license for their space shuttle. Him and Oursler got together to whip up a killer design, and thus, Space Shuttle was born. This game was a hit, and pinball got to live another day. Look, it's got a spaceship. Meanwhile, Zaccaria was like, that's not impressive. Look at our robot bridge. Damn, those guys got a robot bridge. After a 5-year hiatus, Ender would come back with their Brave team, and it's just like the Ender we all know and love. Inder really looked at everyone else getting crucified by video games and said, "This seems like as good a time as any to come back." And then, Williams released Sorcerer. Look, the eyes light up. Oh, don't look now, Zaccaria just released Clown, complete with a big red bar right in the middle of the playfield. Thanks to the rapid advancement pinball's been making lately, like cool ramps, better tech, and speech, pinball production's been getting a lot more involved. You used to only need a designer to slap together some whitewood and send it in for a paint job. Now you need a whole team consisting of designers, mechanical engineers, artists, coders, sound engineers, musicians, etc. Speaking of ramps are cool. Barry Ouster thought so too, but so far, ramps haven't been as integral to the game as they typically are today. Ouster wanted to make a game where ramp shots were the main attraction, and he fittingly themed his ramp-centric game off of his favorite local amusement park, Riverview, which is dead. The game would be called Comet, named after his favorite coaster at the park, which, according to RCDB, doesn't exist. But that doesn't matter, because look at those sexy ramps. Big ramps, spiral ramps, snowman. Ouster really went all out on this one. This would just be another big win for Williams' growing collection of classics, even getting 2 sequels of its own down the road. On the opposite end of the spectrum, GamePlan just released Cyclops, and now they're dead. I would love to tell you the legacy GamePlan left behind, but sadly they never really had one. They came out of the box trying to ride a fad, only to get killed by arcade games later on. But let's get back to the protagonist of the story, Williams, as we see them release High Speed, a game based on the true story of the time Steve Ritchie accidentally got chased by cops going 146 miles per hour, which the whole time he had no clue what was going on. You know the shtick by now, classic Williams game, everyone loves it, got a sequel later on, moving on. Why don't we check in on our good buddy Premier? Wait, who is that? Well, it turns out Rat Slime hasn't been doing too well. You would have thought that changing the name would have automatically solved all their problems. Guess not. Well, anyway, Rat Slime had a brilliant idea to get them out of the hole. To change their name again. This time to Premier. Genius. Regardless, Premier wanted to continue the Rat Slime tradition of only making games that could be compared to slime. From a rat. For example, Premier decided that art sucks, so they created the first pinball machine to have a photograph as the backglass. The game, Raven, was critically panned, and no one liked the JPEG of Bootleg Rambo either. Despite that, Premier would go ahead anyway and make games mostly made up of photographs, and they would all look, great? 10 years after their last release, Recreativos Franco would come back for no reason and make Superstar, and then go back to their bingo machines or some shit, I don't know what they make. Williams is ready to release their next game, Grand Lizard, but uh-oh, the backglass art was made for a standard display and not the alphanumeric display the game was using, so they had to change it. Ta-da, it looks great, ship it out. So do you want the good news first, or the bad news? Home consoles. Console gaming had been around for a little bit now, but with consoles like the NES, they were starting to rival the quality of those you'd find in an arcade. Why would anyone go to an arcade to play games when you can just play them in the comfort of your own home? This was a realization a lot of people had in the late 80s, and before you knew it, arcade games were dead. So, what about pinball? Dead too? Well, no. Unlike video games, it's not like you can replicate a pinball machine on a console. Not well, anyway. In fact, pinball and other things you might find in a Brutal Moves video kind of fell into a special niche apart from video games and really began to thrive in this era. Pinball, in particular, was about to go off. That's right, it's time for the third, I think, pinball resurgence to begin, and this was gonna be a good one.